All right, I think that's as many people as are going to start at the beginning. So let's just go ahead and get started. So today we have Francis and we have Arya. Remember, Arya is my boo. Francis is Arya's ex. And I thought it was going to be interesting to start talking about Arya has been watching a new TV show. And by new, I mean not at all new. What TV show you've been watching, Arya?
The L word.
Oh, yeah? And do you like it?
Yes, yes. I skip the sex scenes, but yeah, I like it.
But did you always
It's
like the
just
L word?
no, because I typically didn't really like gay things, so I would often avoid it. But I did, watch it here and there.
And do you identify as being gay?
No,
Have you been in relationships with women before?
yes,
Are you primarily attracted to women?
usually.
And do you consider yourself then bisexual if you're not gay or what?
I think that's probably closest to the truth, I guess. I mean, it still kind of doesn't sound right when I say it, but yeah, that's close to the truth.
Okay. And then, so, I mean, the L word, like, have you always liked the L word?
No, in fact, I used to have complicated feelings about the L word.
And Francis, can you vouch for this?
Yeah, I can vouch for this.
So what were her complicated feelings about the L word, if you can remember? I mean, the L word's like what, 10, 15 years old or something?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
So Francis,
Yeah.
you're a fan of the L word, right? You watched it when it came out or whatever.
Yeah, I've probably watched through it a few times. I think my perspective on it's probably different every time I've watched it so far. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
a few times. Okay, so a little bit of
Yeah.
an expert on this. So the first time you were watching it, though, my impression is you two were together. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yeah. We were together the first time I ever watched it.
And did Arya, was she into it? Was she like, oh, yep, I support you in this watching, and it's cool representation of like gay communities and stuff?
I mean, she was supportive of me watching it. She kind of just always let me do whatever, but we would have conversations about it sometimes and like how the show portrays sexuality and what its strengths and weaknesses are. And I think too, and correct me if I'm wrong, around that time, I think Arya was struggling to define her sexuality, or maybe not struggling, but just hadn't really defined it. And so I think, especially with the gratuitous amounts of lesbian sex on the show, I think sometimes is it can be a little bit troubling of just like, okay, are we watching this because it's entertaining or because it's sexy, or are we learning anything from it? Is it teaching us anything about ourselves? So those were all kind of discussions that I remember having the first time I watched it when we were together.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I used to compare it to softcore porn at times. I
Yeah.
don't know if you remember that, Francis, but I still kind of feel that way. But yeah, it's neither here nor there.
So now you take
Mm-hmm.
out the sex scenes, Arya, and how is it now? Is it you had zero interest in it before, and now how do you relate to it? What do you think
Well,
of
I
it?
wouldn't say zero interest. I would say that, the drama of it, is alluring. Of course, it's, entertaining to watch. Now, I think I understand better the intricacies of each of the relationships. I used to just think, okay, all of these women, they're just sleeping with each other and they're friends and then foes and then lovers. And now I'm like, okay, I can see the complexity of each of these characters more than I did before, I think.
And what do you credit that shift in? Like your perspective has shifted quite a bit in the past, whatever, 5 years or so that it's been.
I would probably credit my therapist. I've been going to him for almost 3 years now. And primarily we've worked on my interpersonal relationships. I asked him, why do all of my relationships seem to blow up? I do not have typical breakups. I have like World War III breakups, and even friendship breakups, right, are super messy and drawn out and kind of terrible. So I told him I wanted to stop having these kind of like falling outs with people.
Mm-hmm. And then, so that's what you originally went to your therapist for, or do you want to give us a background on why you chose to go to therapy?
Oh, okay. Yes. I chose to go to therapy. I didn't really choose. you know, I had gotten into some trouble, and had some medical issues, and my family's like, you know, something isn't right here. You know, I don't think that they would have used the word sociopath. I'm not sure that they still would use that word, but I think that they were like, you know, we're bailing you out all the time. And, you know, it's financially draining, it's emotionally draining. And, you know, maybe you should talk to somebody, you know, with your downtime or whatever. And I was like, you know, fine, I'll do this, you know, just to get you guys off my back. And my therapist, the first time I saw him, you know, he asked me, hey, why do you think that you're here? And I told him nothing was wrong with me. You know, I'm just here because I had a family recommendation, you know. And finally he was like, but if you could like pinpoint one issue, one thing that you want to get better about, what would it be? And I was like, my interpersonal relationships suck, you know.
Because of the breakups, or just there were other things too?
It felt like everything at that point in time. I mean, it was my breakups, it was my friendships, it was my falling out, my kind of periodic habit of falling out with my family, different family members, and just some of the wreckage, you know, from my jobs and things like that, you know, deserting jobs and fighting with people at my jobs. It was like, you know, it seemed like a lot of drama was surrounding me all the time. You know, it was like the eye of the storm, really.
Right. And so we've been together for like 3 years now. And I remember when you finally felt like your relationships were better, and your therapist was like, okay, you have now accomplished the first goal that you had with therapy, but you have kept seeing your therapist. So how has your goal with your therapist kind of changed over time?
Well, I do like him. You know, that helps. My first therapist I went to a long time ago, I just stopped going to her. You know, I couldn't stand the way that she spoke. And she kind of had like this locked jaw too. And I was like, I can't look at her and listen to her and take her seriously. But I actually like my current therapist now. I do think that my interpersonal relationships are better. You know, I think that, I was on a moral high horse for a long time. You know, at first I was kind of like, you know, I'm the devil and I like it, you know, and then I'm like, I'm the devil and I kind of regret it. And then I'm like, well, actually, I'm the best at therapy. I am the best at getting better. I have accelerated getting better. Therefore, everyone else should be able to get better too.
Yeah, I remember this time.
Yes, I'm sure it was a hard time.
Well, everything I was doing too was like dark and, you know, kind of evil. For I was like 1 foot in the devil's camp or whatever.
Yes, yes. So really, I think the best word to describe it would be judgmental. You know, and now I still think I'm mildly judgmental, but I think I'm more self-aware about it. You know, now I'm more interested in helping people and kind of cultivating my true self, my preferences, and you know, always kind of taking the high road with people, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's interesting too, because, you know, we've talked about this kind of transition as it's gone, and you've had like varying degrees, let's say, of like self-reflection, and probably Francis can also attest to this, varying degrees of self-reflection, where it will kind of like, you know, it's not even like it's like you used to be 0 and now you're 10 all the time. You know, it kind of can like come in waves. But it's been interesting, I think, for you because, and for me too, because it's this whole path of self-discovery. You know, I would think to myself, having kind of gone through almost an identical situation, so I'd be kind of like, well, I can see where she is right now on this, and she's like a little bit stuck, but I'm not sure that she'll stay stuck, or maybe this is just who she is, because it's kind of like digging a hole. You know, you're digging a hole, and I've always grown up in like this like clay soil or something that also has these strains of granite. So you go out and dig a hole in the backyard, and you could like get soft soil, or you could hit some clay, or then you could hit like a strain of granite and not be able to really dig, you know, past that or something. And that kind of seemed like what you were doing is almost like excavating your identity. Does that kind of sound accurate to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I would agree with you that it came in different waves. You know, one might be regret, and then anger and judgment. I talked to Francis about this a little bit yesterday. You know, it felt like every few weeks or so, I would adopt a new behavior that I just thought was right. Right? It was the right thing to do. It was the religious thing to do. It was the stoic thing to do. And obviously that definitely made my external relationships a little bit under a magnifying glass to me. You know, I'd be like, this person is wrong because of this, and etc.
You know, it's interesting because I had like a similar thing where I was like, you know, I'm going to be as straight-laced Mormon as possible, you know, 100%,
Uh-huh.
whatever. And it, you know, it's kind of funny because it was like, you know, is that actual Mormon theology? You know, it might be a Mormon theology that some Mormons recognize, but other ones would be like, that's just, you know, kind of the weird culture of like Utah Mormonism or whatever. But I was just like, I'm going to look and talk and act like a Mormon. I'm just going to be like what everybody expects a Mormon girl to be, and just kind of do these XYZ things. I don't know why I also went through that phase. It's kind of a weird thing where it's like, I think you almost feel unmoored a little bit, you know, like here you are, you know, going through kind of identity puberty. You're going through such a huge transition in which you're finally kind of trying to, you know, reconnect with these maybe lost or forgotten aspects of your identity, things that you have like, you know, maybe been a little bit aware of, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 aware of kind of all your life about, but they have not really played any consistent role, you know, kind of like a deadbeat dad type character is like what the identity, the role that identity has played in your life, right? And so kind of tell me, so you're talking to Frances about it, and Frances, do you relate at all to kind of what she's telling you about having like rediscovered her identity through this process of therapy, years of therapy?
Yeah, I think I was kind of struck by how similar our trajectories seemed in some ways. That I love that concept of identity puberty. I relate to that a lot. I think throughout my life, I've struggled to find a really strong sense of self, and it would almost just be it would be appealing to find something with strict rules and identity attached to it sometimes, because you know what's expected of you, and it's like somebody hands you this box and it's like, okay, if you do all of these things that are in this box, then this is who you are, and you don't really have to think about it too much, just do these things.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it's messier than that, right? And like your identity can't all fit in a nice little box, so you kind of have to try and fail a few things. And I remember every time I would visit my family, my sister eventually told me, she's like, you know, you're kind of like a whole different person every time you come home. Like, you know, it's like you're trying out these different ideas and identities to see which one's gonna stick. And so I thought that was really interesting that Arya has experienced something similar to that.
Yeah, I had, you know, that actually a friend of mine said something similar kind of when it must have been like in the second or third-ish year of therapy. And she's like, yeah, basically the exact same thing. Like you seem like a different person all the time, and great for you that every day you're like, okay, I finally found myself. I've discovered myself and it's X. And then the next day it's Y. And she's like, that's great for you that you're on this journey or whatever. And maybe you'll end up sticking to something for like longer than a few days. But she kind of said, you know, I'll peace out in the meantime. You know, I'm cool.
Yeah.
not riding on this roller coaster with you. You know, like maybe contact me in a few months if you feel more stable. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, she just
Yeah,
wants the finished product.
yeah, I didn't know how to do it without putting all of my eggs in whatever basket I was carrying at the time. And so I can imagine that was really exhausting and kind of volatile for the people that were close to me, because it's like I would discard all of the things that had any affiliation with my quote unquote old self, and then new me, I would just go into it head first. And it's like, this is me now. This is who I am. And yeah, from a perspective of somebody who loves and cares about me, I can imagine it was kind of like whiplash every time we saw each other. It's like, what is this new thing? What are you trying on now?
So I think it's probably maybe almost inherently kind of a naturally dirty process. But what were some of, you know, question for both of you, what were some of the things that ended up helping you to think about in terms of discovering your identity, or like, how did you go about recognizing new aspects of your identity would be a good question too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One thing my therapist told me, you know, when you're by yourself, right, and you're not with anyone, and you're not, let's say, watching TV or listening to music or something, you know, what are you thinking about? You know, what comes to mind? Or what are the things that you're willing to spend a lot of money on, right? All these different things. And so I'm answering these questions where I'm like, this doesn't seem conducive to what we're talking about at all. You know, why do you care?
Uh-huh.
And really the crux of it was that he was saying to me, you have preferences, you do have interests, you have, passions and interests. They're kind of underdeveloped right now, but you do have them. So that kind of helped me too. Another thing that stuck with me in therapy was when he finally, after months, convinced me that everyone was just as real as me. Everyone was just as complex as me. Everyone had their own preferences, and it was not up to me to decide that for them, right? Or to figure those things out. Some people are guard their identities a little bit more,
Yeah.
So that really helped me. I mean, I still think about that today, like a little bit of a mantra, especially when I
Yes.
see someone that I'm maybe making a few assumptions about. I'm like, okay, they are just as real as me, and I don't like when people make assumptions about me. We were actually talking about this yesterday, Francis. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, as much as you'd like, your sexual identity? I thought this was really interesting yesterday.
Yeah, because we were talking a bit about labels and our comfort or discomfort with them. So one of the things that I figured out over the process of self-discovery was that previous labels that I had used to describe my sexuality just didn't really fit for me. I guess I had tried bisexual or pansexual, and while they're both, I guess, ultimately true, I didn't really feel comfortable with either of them. And I think queer is kind of where I have arrived at a term that I'm most comfortable with. But I'm sure there are people who have other interpretations of the word queer. It means something different to them. But I told Arya, I feel like it fits for me. It feels kind of like the agnosticism of sexuality. It's like I don't have it all pinned down, but I know it's not heterosexual. So this is what I'm working with at the moment. But I'm currently in a relationship with a man and have received some pushback from people that I can't be queer if I'm in a heterosexual relationship. And I just remember it struck me really really funny that it first of all is like an attack on my identity and how I feel about myself, but also just the need that other people have to critique your identity and how you identify. So yeah, that was sort of something we had discussed yesterday.
It's interesting you say this, because you wonder how people like kind of end up the way that we have ended up, having like not so strong sense of identity. But it is interesting to kind of realize that there are other people in the world, other people in our lives, for some reason are really invested in our identity.
Mm-hmm.
And their investment in our identity, often, I kind of say with my dad that I've always liked him to not be focused on me in any sort of way. No attention. I always try to, my phrase is I want to be off his radar, because the more invested he is in me, the more he tends to want to control my life, the more he tends to want to internalize what I'm doing, and kind of feeling like, oh, since, I'm stressing him out, like by the thing I'm doing or whatever, then that justifies him interfering with my life, even as an adult type thing. So have either of you two had experience with this idea of somebody so invested in your sense of your own identity that they're trying to actively interfere with your expression of your own identity?
Absolutely. I've experienced that with my parents as well. I think with my father a bit more aggressively. I think my mother, at least, while she might vocalize that something, some facet of my identity or my lifestyle doesn't fit with her interpretation of who I am, she's a little bit gentler about it, but my dad will get very frustrated when something that I do or something about who I am doesn't fit the idea that he has of me or what he wants me to be. So I think those are the most specific examples that I have. But yeah, I definitely probably I should try that out with my dad, is to just pay less attention to me. I'm doing well over here and we love each other. You don't have to keep
Yes,
tabs on what I'm doing. It just gives you more opportunity to be upset if it's not what you want me to be doing.
exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a relative similar to that, not my parents, but I have a relative that Frances knows. And we were speaking about her yesterday. She seems to be very invested, in my life and my interests. In fact, so much so that she's kind of driving the ship, right? Um, Anything, she would never, for instance, say, Arya, I think you're a sociopath, but she does like to tell some stories from my childhood, one of which I always attempted to drown my best friend when we were little in the bathtub together. And, I thought it was funny. So she likes to tell these stories, but she does not like to use the word sociopath. But I was telling Frances yesterday, maybe if she had come to that conclusion on her own before me, right? Before I would label myself that way, she would feel more comfortable with it, right?
Oh, because she's not the one that's telling you who you are, then she wants to kind of fight against it. It wasn't her idea type thing.
Yes, yes. She wants both to be the sorcerer of my identity, but also she doesn't like it. Frankly, she doesn't like it if I'm something else, right?
Yeah.
From month to month, really.
It's interesting. And does anyone have anything else to kind of say? You've been thinking, oh, I want to bring this up. We talked about this briefly, but I want to jump back in about this.
No.
No? Okay. So I was thinking about this idea of how you kind of, about Arya, what you said about, has helped you to understand and probably kind of like vice versa. It's helped you to understand your own identity, to understand other people have an identity that's just as sacrosanctly theirs, unique and has all the same depth that yours does, et cetera, et cetera. And probably it's probably reinforcing. It helps you to have that identity, and you having that identity probably helps you to recognize that in other people. And I actually think this is kind of maybe one of the reasons why psychopaths have such a hard time. Like, it's easy for us to study people, because we're like little scientists. We have like basically kind of very present, let's say, emotion kind of clouding our judgment or our perception of other people. So we're just observing people and we can predict people's behavior very well. But I don't think we really understand people. And that's why I thought was so interesting about your love of the L word now, because you're in season 3 or whatever, right? And spoiler alert, what happens in season 3?
Dana dies.
Yeah, the character dies. And I remember watching it at the time.
Guys.
Yeah, and still being like, oh, wow, this is pretty sad. Like, I myself got caught up in it. And how did you feel when it happened, Frances, when you watched that?
Yeah, it's devastating. I thought it was, I didn't expect something like that from a show like The L Word at that point in the show. It caught me pretty off guard. I didn't think they would do that to us.
Yeah, it's not like Grey's Anatomy or something where like a main character is getting killed every season, or some of these shows where they pride themselves on killing off the main characters,
Right.
Yeah. And so how do you feel about this, Arya? Like before you probably would have been like, okay, that's just what happens. That's how you were when we watched Game of Thrones. You're like, okay, whatever, so-and-so's the king.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
It's not, it wasn't pleasant for me the first time I saw The L Word to know that, Dana dies. It wasn't pleasant for me to watch that. But I was also kind of like, we can just like weather through this, and by season 4, we'll all have forgotten about her. And now I feel like I almost want to skip season 3, because I know what's going to happen. I used to do this thing. I would always watch the first and last episode of any popular show, and that way, if people tried to talk to me about it, I wouldn't have to really feign interest, and I already knew what happened. So we could at least have a conversation about it, but I wouldn't have to watch 12 seasons or something. But yeah, now I feel inclined to skip season 3, but I think that I am going to kind of force myself to watch it and be sad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And how this is kind of an interesting point. Force yourself to be sad about it. So now with your identity comes also, does this sound right? Like a greater depth of emotional feeling. and not just emotional feeling, but a specific type of emotional feeling that I call identity hits, which is now that you're actually identifying with something. It'd be kind of like this. Let's say you don't even know that like American football exists. You're not at all invested about anything that's happening today, like the Sunday, the big day of American football, right? NFL football. But once you start kind of getting invested, once you start kind of identifying yourself as a fan, let's say like a Saints fan or something, then you could be like so devastated by it, like why do you think this is? And or like in what ways have you experienced this that it surprises you, either Arya or Francis?
I was telling Francis yesterday when we were talking about identity that two things happen to me now. I'm offended, right? So if someone says, you're a liar or something, I'm deeply offended. I mean, even if they're joking about it. I had the guy at work yesterday say like, oh, you lied to me, but he was joking 100%. And I was still kind of offended by it because I don't think of myself as a liar.
But
and then
did you used to get offended by stuff like that? Is that a change for you?
It is, yes.
So you didn't used to get offended. Somebody'd say that about you and you'd be like, oh, okay, that's,
Yeah, I mean, that's just what you think, I wasn't protective over my identity anymore. So now I feel like, I'll kind of go back into the deep recesses of my mind and be like, did I lie to this person? Does that make me a liar? I feel protective over it because I don't think of myself that way,
Wow.
So I think that's part of why I get offended, and Francis was saying yesterday that the knee-jerk reaction is anger. You want to get angry at these people. And we were talking a little bit about how you want to kind of prove them wrong, right? I am not a liar. I am not this, I'm not that. But you shouldn't have to, right? If it's your identity, you should feel protected enough by your own identity that you don't even get angry about it. But yes, I still do.
Yeah. And Francis?
Yeah. For myself, I guess this seems so simple and so common sense, but when I first really started working on engaging in less destructive behavior and doing things less motivated by emotion or things that were self-serving, I remember the first time I hurt someone I cared about after that, completely by accident, not by something I had done on purpose. It was really devastating for me versus, I wouldn't say that I used to go out of my way to hurt anybody, but I kind of did whatever was going to serve me in the best way. And then I would try to find a way to make it up to people on the back end. But I had the realization that being good and being better is not a decision you make one time. Like, it's something that every single day I'm going to have to get up and work on that actively, and that people are still going to be hurt by things that I do or by things that I say, whether that was my intention or not. And so that's definitely something I think I take more personally now than I used to.
That's really interesting. So you had you've developed an identity as a person who does not hurt other people. And then when you actually do hurt people, then it hurts your sense of self. You're like, wow, am I really this person that I thought I am? That type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first time it happened, I kind of spiraled a little bit, and it was really easy to think, oh, I haven't made any progress. I really haven't changed that much. But in reality, it's all an ongoing thing, and inevitably we're all going to hurt people from time to time, even if our active intention is not to do that. So that's definitely something I struggled with a lot at first, and I'm still kind of working on.
That's kind of interesting because this idea of act versus intention is something, that I mentioned before therapy, and probably I wouldn't agree with my own thoughts then, because I'd be like, sociopaths, yeah, let's say they don't have the good intention, but let's say they still do the good act for whatever reason, manipulative or whatever reasons. I was like, they're still doing good things, guys. Like, what else do you want from them? To thought police them or something? That was kind of like my feeling before, because I just had no care for intention. Intention didn't matter to me. And I actually, I think I remember this in the book, especially because people quote it so frequently back to me, where, I'm talking about how my parents let me down. And I say, I learned to not trust love or care about love because you couldn't rely on love. Because I could tell that my parents still loved me, but they let me down in so many ways that basically almost killed me, several times, where you're just like, wow, you're, even though you love me, it's still this bad, so who cares about love? And I think I was always that way about who cares about intention, who cares that you didn't mean it, because that used to be the thing, like when you were oh, I didn't mean it, and then that was somehow fine. I had no, because if you have no sense of identity, you don't really have intention. You're just kind of like, every interaction is exactly as you say, Francis, like, how is this most advantageous to me? And of course I don't want to lose these relationships, so I'll make it up to them in the back end, kind of thing. That's how I was, probably more so than you, Francis. I don't mean to say that you were as bad as I was
No.
about this. But so intention didn't really matter. It was just like, well, every kind of thing is just kind of trying to do this quick calculus of how this situation can best play in my favor, and we'll see how this kind of results in the end. But now, like, if you have a sense of self, then intention matters all the time in choices. It's like, let's say I think of myself as a good musician and I play a wrong note, there is a tension there. And I think it's that kind of tension, that makes people struggle with identity issues, not just from that, but people's active judgment, right, about your identity. They don't like the fact that you're queer, Francis, or they don't like the fact that you're independent, Arya. Right. And so that they're kind of like, we say identity politics, but I actually think that we're having an identity crisis, in our culture, maybe not the broader culture, but at least American culture, in which everybody seems to have some sort of identity ish a little bit. Either they have like not enough of a sense of identity, like the three of us, and they've had to kind of develop it, or you get on the flip side, people who have too broad of a sense of identity and anything offends them. You cut down your neighbor's tree or something, they take an identity hit or something. You're like, well, technically the tree's on my side. They're like, but that was my favorite tree, whatever else it is or something. Everybody's kind of making things about their identity, so I almost think, I get a lot of people who are kind of like, come from like a Buddhist or Stoic philosophy, where they're, Buddhism is like, let's kind of downplay the identity a little bit. And Stoicism's kind of like, you can only control yourself and do not try to control other people, because that is like a path to sorrow, basically. If you start kind of like your dad, Francis, if you start putting your identity in things that you can't really control, like your daughter's choices, then this is like something that is going to end up in sadness for you, because she's inevitably, you're inevitably going to do something that he wouldn't have chosen, just because, you're a separate independent person who's different than him. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot from reading some Stoicist philosophy, and it's been really helpful for me, that I'm responsible for myself and my own happiness, and that my ego and my identity is not as important as what I do. And I think that's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that recently.
And I think it's true. I used to not really care about conflict, right? I'll be like, I'll up the ante, or I'll take it to a 10, I don't care. And now I feel like when conflict happens, like a conflict that I have with my relative that has problems with my identity, the more I kind of see her as a complex person, or I can understand her better. I mean, I used to think I can understand anyone all the time, and I can read you across the room, right? I can tell you your fears and your desires and all these different things, but I still think that I had blinders on, and I think now, having had the kind of conflict that I've had with my aunt, I actually love her more, for those flaws or whatever, or the way that I've responded to those flaws.
That's really interesting. And this is probably, we have about, maybe 3 minutes left to talk about this, but like, what role has boundaries, personal boundaries played in, now that you have a sense of identity, you do kind of have to protect it. Why? Because, people are sloppy, right? They do want to come in and try to make it, live your life for you, whether it's your boss or whether it's a parent or a teacher or whatever else it is. So how do you guys conceive of boundaries now, and how is it different than before?
For me, it's been difficult. I don't know about you, Francis, but I have developed boundaries very slowly, at a snail's pace, in fact. And sometimes I actually think that mine are too rigid, they're too reliant on what other people are going to do. But I don't know about you, Francis, what do you think?
Yeah, setting boundaries is still something I struggle with. It's something I'm currently working on in therapy. I think it is really important, though, once you develop a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of who you are, to protect that in some sense. And so I'm definitely still working on that. I think I used to view conflict as an inherently bad thing, and I no longer view it that way, but it still has some lingering effects on how I act and how I'm able to set boundaries with people, because setting boundaries inevitably will lead to conflict. So I think that's something I'm still working on.
That's a really interesting point, because it's true. You, as similar as your identity issues might be in a way to Arya's or mine, let's say, there's still a difference, because Arya is like, her issue before was like conflict was always at a 10 or an 11 out of 10. But I can see it in other kind of normal people who are trying to have like a stronger sense of identity, is that, yeah, a lot of the reason why they have such a weak sense of identity, it looks like, is because it's conflict avoidant, and so it's like, hey, if I just am not anything, then I don't have to assert myself, and if I don't assert myself, then I can avoid the conflict. Then it's because, maybe my guess is, at least in what I see, it's because you love the person, you don't want to have conflict with them, because that kind of, in a way makes you feel vulnerable, because this person that you love is, willing to have this level of conflict with you, and then you just stop doing it. And maybe for sociopaths, that's how it was, like initially, like, when we were very small or something, we're just kind of a little bit conflict avoidant, but it just happens so much earlier and so much more severely than we can remember. But that's basically it. Any closing thoughts, guys? Maybe we don't even have time for them. Probably just wrap them up. But this has like been great. It's been very interesting. We talked about some stuff that I've never thought about. Maybe we'll come back and talk about boundaries. We could talk a little bit more about how you developed your sense of identity. And so we'll hopefully get you both back on talking about this in maybe a month or something.
Sounds good.
I love that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll post this. Thanks.